Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to this event this evening. We are so blessed to have Karen, Sally, and David giving us a great presentation on the amendments to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, which is something that I've been kind of interested in seeing what's going to come out of it, and it's going to be nice to get the download. If you're not aware, this is a New Zealand Coastal Society event. We are an organization that is a specialist subgroup of Engineering New Zealand who are really interested in furthering the coastal environment from both a built perspective, but also the environment and policy and planning and those kind of things as well. We're not just an engineering-based organization. So if you are interested, go and check it out. It is a really great organization. We have a conference every year, which is really awesome. And next year, we are hosting an international conference called the the Australasian Ports and Coasts Conference. I should know this because I'm going to be chairing it, which is going to be here in Wellington, which is quite exciting. Yeah, questions, if we can hold them all to the end. There will be a roaming mic for those in the room and online. If you can just put them in the chat and I will follow them and ask them out from there. But without further ado, I'll pass on to Karen.
Thanks, Ryan, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to introduce our presenting team. So we're going to tell you about all the policies at the national level that are affecting coastal management in New Zealand from now on, well, from the 15th of January on. And so I'm Karen Bell and I work for the Department of Conservation. I work on the resource management reforms and particularly I've been working on the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and related work for about the last 15 years, first of all as a consultant, and then I went and worked for my client, DOC. And I'd like to introduce Sally Bagley, if you could give a wave, Sally. So Sally works for the Ministry for the Environment, and she's going to cover the natural hazards part of the discussion. And then I'd like to pass over to, Sally will then pass over to David Chittenden, and Chitty is going to talk to us about the infrastructure changes in national direction. So this is part of the Resource Management Act reform. It's not part of the new reforms that are going through the Select Committee at the moment, which some of you will be aware of. So the whole Resource Management Act is changing, and it'll be replaced with two acts, the Natural Environment Act and the Planning Act. They are expected to go through the parliamentary process later this year. But this is what's happening under the Resource Management Act, and it's called Phase 2 of the Resource Management Reforms. And it's intended that this national direction that we've been working on over the last few years will input into the new system eventually. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is what the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement looks like. And it states the policies to achieve the sustainable management of the coastal environment, and it's administered by the Department of Conservation. The coastal environment includes the CMA, the coastal marine area, out to 12 nautical miles, and the adjacent coastal land that has coastal influence. That part of the coastal extent is quite hard to map. Examples, the emphasis on this document is on integration and strategic planning. And so in terms of decision making, it must be given effect to in regional policy statements, regional plans and district plans. And consent decision makers must have regard to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. So the New Zealand Coastal sorry, just before I finish, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, the first one came out in 1994. It's the only compulsory national direction under the RMA, but since then there have been a lot of other pieces of national direction. And so the 2001 version, which is quite long-standing, replaced that 1994 version. But the government wants some changes. The government wants to make it easier to consent priority activities while safeguarding the environment. And priority activities are defined as infrastructure, including renewable energy, aquaculture, and the extraction of minerals for the purpose of supporting infrastructure. So I just want to run through the parts of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement that have changed. So Policy 6, which covers activities in the coastal environment, and Policy 8, which relates to aquaculture, have changed. And this will influence consent conditions more than plan processes. So it's more about consenting than it is about plan making. And the protection policies, so for biodiversity, natural character and natural features and natural landscapes, they were going to be included, but they weren't at the last minute because anything to do with environmental effects was decided to be dealt with in the new RM system. So it doesn't cover policies 11, 13 and 15, which some of you will know about. So they're the avoid policies. They have some matters in them to avoid. So I'm just going to run through in a bit more detail those changes to the policies 6 and 8. So policy 6, there was a strengthening of the language to make it more directive. The functional needs test was expanded to a functional or operational need test to better enable priority activities to locate in the coastal marine area, and requiring consideration of the potential of renewable resources in the coastal environment to meet the needs of both current and future generations. So that policy in the past just talked about future generations, but it now talks about current and future generations. So that's policy 6. And policy 8, which is about aquaculture, there's a new policy to provide for aquaculture within aquaculture settlement areas. And these are areas that are set aside for Crown redress for iwi to use. And there was another change, which was that cultural and ecological benefits of aquaculture must explicitly be considered and recognised. And that policy was there before, but it talked about environmental matters, and now that's been changed to ecological matters. Sorry, is that? Yeah. So that's that one. So I think, oh no, I have got a couple more, sorry. So in terms of implementation, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement was gazetted, the new changes were gazetted on the 18th of December last year, and they came into force in January this year. And they will have immediate effect on consenting. And if you want further information, I've included some links to the new amended New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. And also you can refer to the recommendations and decisions report, which explains a bit more about why the changes that were made were made. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a ring or actually just flick me an email. There's my email address. So I think we can circulate, do people have access to this presentation?
I'm sure we can put on the New Zealand Coastal Society?
Yeah, so we'll put it on the New Zealand Coastal Society website. So now I'd like to hand over to Sally, who's going to talk about natural hazards.
Kia ora koutou, for Sally Bagley, tōku ingoa. Yeah, so I am in the Natural Hazard Policy team at MFE. We primarily work on all of the natural hazard policy in the resource management and new planning system. We do, though, we're grouped, if you like, in terms of business unit with the rest of the adaptation unit. And the reason for that is to make sure we get that alignment across kind of what the NPS, what the planning system policies are doing around natural hazards with the kind of direction for other adaptation work, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that space as well. So yes, like the changes to the NZCPS, MPSNH was gazetted just before Christmas and came into force mid-January. It was designed keeping in mind that it is going to operate during this transition to the new planning system. And there is this idea that it's not going to be in place for too many years because the new national direction developed under the Planning and Environment, Natural Environment Bills will replace the resource management system, and there'll be more national instruments to cover that. And I think David's going to touch on that a little bit later. So it's an MPS and has the effect that all MPSs have, but it has been specifically designed with consenting in mind. So now that it has a legal effect, if you're an RMA consenting decision maker, has to have regard to it when it's deciding on their subdivision and land use consents. There's no specific timeframes for implementing it through plan changes. The plan stop process, which was put in place last year, that has an exemption in it though, so you can do natural hazard plan changes even though we've got this plan stop process in place. And any plan change decision makers now have to give effect to the MPSNH, and that's even if the plan change was notified before the MPSNH was gazetted. So yeah, it's designed with consenting in mind. It can be, because it is an MPS, it also does have an application and plan changes. No requirement to do a plan change though, but if you are doing a plan change, then you do need to give effect to it. Next slide, please. The intent of the MPS for natural hazards is to set out a balanced way for councils to manage natural hazard risks for new development, which is based on the level of risk which is involved. And the rationale for this is that by making new developments safer, we help to reduce future costs and make communities more resilient. What it requires is for local authorities, and specifically the resource management decision makers, to assess risk and manage it in a way which is risk-based and proportionate. And the idea is that with this framework, we'll get greater consistency across the country about how that is done. The policies have a strong emphasis on avoiding very high risk, on using best available information, and they require consideration of the impacts of climate change well into the future. To do the risk assessment, decision makers do need to be considering mitigations. It sets a national baseline, but there's specific wording in the MPSNH which makes it clear that more conservative local provisions can apply. It includes what we're calling a risk matrix, which sets out what different levels of risk are in terms of their likelihood and consequence. In terms of the interaction with the NZCPS, it's a little bit nuanced. It has specific words in the policy. It says the NZCPS prevails if there is a conflict between the provisions. So to implement it, what this means is practitioners will need to take all efforts to read all of the policies together in light of the contextual information which is at hand. And it's only if the conflict remains that you need to apply this NZCPS prevails approach. And if we're talking about consenting provisions, we have to remember that the requirement is to have regard to each of the NPSs. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there about where if you're flexibility in there about how decision makers read all of those policies together. And what you have to do is give due consideration to them all, but there's some flexibility as to how that plays out. So how much conflict will there be in these approaches, like in between the NZCPS and the NPS-NH? Well, it sort of depends on the nature of the application, really. The NZCPS approach to hazard risk is more explicitly precautionary, avoidance-focused, and seeking to reduce exposure. The NPS-NH, on the other hand, has different terminology in it. It's very much a risk-based decision framework that focuses on hazard risk being assessed and proportionately managed across all of the environments. So it's safe to say the NZCPS approach should be seen as more restrictive. In terms of how it plays out, well, I guess if it's an infrastructure or primary production activity, the NPS for NH actually specifically doesn't apply to infrastructure and primary production. So that would mean there's no conflict, NZCPS applies. If it's something to do with concern about ecological harm from a coastal hazard, again, in that situation, because the NPS-NH is focused on people and property, it doesn't have a big application in that type of thing. And so again, NZCPS is going to prevail and there's not really a conflict. If it's a very high coastal hazard to property, in this case, you will see both the NPS-NH and NZCPS applying. And while the policies are differently phrased, they're both using avoid language. So again, hopefully there's not too much conflict in that situation. It's probably where we're in that more high or medium level of risk where we will see NPS-NH as being less restrictive, which is when potentially there will be a conflict, and then you lean down back into this NZCPS prevails wording. So that's kind of how we think it plays out. And for now, that approach is what was proposed to recognise, I guess, the complexity and sensitivity and particular importance of ecological values in the coastal environment. And it is probably something that will need to be worked through in more detail as the new subsequent national instruments are developed for the new system. Next slide, please. Just quickly here, there will be some people in this group that will have helpfully put submissions in on the discussion document, which was circulated last year for the natural hazard policies. So I guess for those people, just so that you know the things that have changed, I guess. And what was put out in the discussion document, it was just about being proportionate. And as a result of the submissions, a policy was put forward and has been proposed now to require that you actually avoid new development where the risk is assessed as very high. So that's stronger than what was in the discussion document. There's also a bit of a change to off-site risk. It was in the discussion document, it was a no increase approach, whereas it has been changed to manage proportionately and avoided and mitigated because of that fact that no increase approaches can be so difficult to implement. And there's a range of other things that have happened in drafting as well, which if you're a planner, you might be interested in, but if you're an engineer, you are probably not. On to the next slide. We are publishing guidance in the next couple of weeks. I think it's about 20 odd pages long. It doesn't go into, the guidance doesn't go into sort of specific detail of exactly how you should be managing natural hazard risks. Because our sorts of policy, our guidance documents, it is quite hard to do that. You know, we can only actually say what the policies require. But what it does do is clarifies the intent of the policy and provides some high-level recommendations for how you might implement some particular aspects. So keep an eye out for that. And then there's information on the website, or else you could contact me or the manager of our team, who's Connie May Nisbet. And on that basis, I'll pass over to David Chittenden.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, I'm David Chittenden. I'm in the infrastructure policy team at Ministry for the Environment. I can't be there in person today because I live and work in Nelson. So yeah, I'm going to take you through 3 other NPSs that have also came into force in January this year. And they're all related to infrastructure. So there is a brand new national policy statement for infrastructure. There is an amended national policy statement on renewable electricity generation and an amended national policy statement on electricity networks. So that has been expanded from transmission to also include the distribution network and has been renamed. And these changes were significant, so they are essentially rewrites of the entire document. Just going to the aim of what the government's trying to achieve here. So New Zealand's infrastructure deficit has been kind of well publicised, and there's work by the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission which shows that out of all the investment that is required over the next 10, 20 years, 60 cents in every dollar is required to go on existing infrastructure, so maintaining and upgrading existing infrastructure. So we really need to better enable that. The other aspect is that there's a lot of consenting costs. In fact, a disproportionate proportion of total cost goes on consenting for small projects. So these are projects where, it could be maintaining infrastructure where the effects are relatively well known and it's quite a regular activity, but there's still consents required for that, and they're quite costly compared to the actual amount of doing that project. So yeah, we want to address some of these issues. And the other thing the government wants to do is double renewable electricity generation capacity by 2050, and that's really in mind of our climate change goals. So if we're going to transfer sectors of the economy, such as the transport sector, off fossil fuels and electrify them, then obviously we need a lot more renewable electricity generation to support that. The next slide, please. So I'm going to just take you through some of the common aspects across these 3 NPSs. So for the existing NPSs that have been amended, they were done in 2008 and 2011, and so they're relatively old, and there's really a style now of the newer NPSs to be much more directive with their policies and to have sort of stronger objectives. So that has been one of the changes that has happened. And there's a better recognition and enablement of the full life cycle of infrastructure. So it's not just about constructing new stuff, it's about ensuring that we can operate, maintain and upgrade all of our existing infrastructure and get the most out of that. There's some more policies articulating the different needs of the different infrastructure to locate, operate or traverse different environments. So, a lot of infrastructure, such as a port, it can only locate where there is suitable natural environment for a port. And infrastructure such as transmission lines, they're linear, they cross the country, and they've got limited choices about some of the environments that they can go across. So there are specific needs of infrastructure that we want decision makers to take better account of. The next point there is about articulating the benefits of the different infrastructure. So obviously these can be at national, regional and local scales, and articulating what benefits we want decision makers to take into account. When the 2 NPSs that already existed were put in place, there was no recognition of Māori interests in those policies. So there's been a policy added to all 3 NPSs, and this has 3 aspects. One is considering the outcomes of any engagement that is done, particularly with tangata whenua. The next one is to do with meeting the development aspirations of tangata whenua. So For instance, a Māori community might want to develop its own renewable electricity generation and a distribution network to service a local community, a remote community. And so we want decision makers to take that into account. And then obviously infrastructure can affect sites that are of significance to Māori or areas of cultural significance. So there are protection policies for those as well. And then the other big thing that these NPSs do is try to manage the interface of infrastructure with other activities. So that might be where stuff actually should be co-located together because it's compatible, but also where it is going to be incompatible with other activities. We might need methods to separate those. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of implementation, it's a similar story to the other NPSs presented today. So there's no direction for councils to undertake plan changes, and the plan stop process is in place as well. There's no direct insertion of provisions. There's no time frame for implementing planning, and yeah, they're much more targeted to consenting. And as has already been said, yeah, so all these NPSs sit alongside each other, and so it's about a particular consent application needing to assess which are the relevant policies across all NPSs for decision making. But I'll just point out there's a bit of an anomaly. There is another NPS that we have on Indigenous biodiversity, and it's for historic reasons that this doesn't apply to the renewable electricity generation NPS or to electricity transmission. Yeah, so there's some history with that. As Karen, I think, alluded to earlier, you know, some of these interactions between infrastructure and the natural environment was going to be addressed, and then the government decided to progress those interactions as part of the new system that we're building. So that historical anomaly still exists, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'll just take you through a couple of, I guess, highlights of some of the individual NPSs. So this is the renewable electricity one. It updates the 2011 version. So some of the updates are that in 2011, we didn't have any of the climate change legislation in New Zealand then. So this NPS, as part of its objective, is trying to ensure more security of electricity supply, but also support us achieving our emission reduction targets and implementing the emissions reduction plan. As I said earlier, if we're going to electrify whole other sectors of the economy, we're going to need a really large increase in reg capacity and output. So it's trying to achieve that. And obviously electricity, and especially renewable electricity, is important for pretty much every aspect for society. So that's recognised. In terms of some of the benefits being acknowledged, so obviously we've had more trouble with dry years, and we've had more power outages in various places, partly through natural hazards. So the more we can get diverse generation types in diverse locations, that will support the security of supply, the resilience of the network, independence of electricity networks. And you know, if we can get more benefits through locating renewable generation next to or close to areas of demand, and also close to the transmission network, then that helps to reduce overall costs on both financial and on other aspects of the environment. So there's some aspects there that we've included. That's probably enough on that. If we can have the next slide, please. I think we've jumped forward too far, have we? Yes, that looks right. So the National Policy Statement for Infrastructure. So this is the new one, and as I said, this was kind of really filling a gap in the system. We just didn't have a policy statement, providing direction across a whole range of infrastructure, just apart from the electricity ones. So, so this is really trying to address a lot of the problems that infrastructure providers have faced in the system. So that's why there's some elements here around being clear about the benefits at all the levels, where infrastructure is enabled to support development and change. So this is about urban, rural development, societal changes, technology changes, aspects like that. And obviously we need timely and efficient delivery, so trying to get some speed into decision making. And then some of the policies I've just mentioned there, I'll just highlight a couple. So there's have regard to spatial planning. So there's currently some non-statutory spatial planning processes that happen around the country, and obviously the integration of infrastructure and land use is really important for spatial planning. So there's a policy there to have regard to that, and that's really a signal to the new system as well, where we will have mandatory regional spatial plans. The next slide, please. Yes, so this is the electricity networks one, so it updates the 2008 electricity transmission NPS. So that's the scope has changed by adding the distribution network. It sits alongside the other NPSs. As I said, there's that carve out for the Indigenous Biodiversity NPS. And there is currently an NES, a National Environmental Standard, for electricity transmission activities, and that is being updated as well and increased in scope, and that will be hopefully coming out in a few months. You may have also seen there's some rules that have come in around standardizing EV charging facilities as well, which is this kind of a bundled together, but the government decided to release that earlier. Next slide, please. Thanks. So like the renewable electricity generation, this also has some aspects of the objective for climate mitigation and meeting renewable energy targets. It's one thing to generate your electricity, but you've got to transmit it and distribute it to where end users are. So it's part of that full system. And there are particular policies in here that are peculiar to the transmission network and to Transpower, who is the national monopoly provider. So for instance, they have to go through Commerce Commission processes for a lot of their projects around the where they're going to operate and the route selection process. So we're just trying to streamline that. So we're making sure the planning system doesn't try and make them jump through the same hoops. Yeah, that's probably enough on that. Back one slide, I think. Yes. So yeah, these are all in force and are on the website. As Sally said as well, there's the submission summaries, the recommendations report to the minister, so you can see the process there and what was recommended. And see I haven't put my email address up, but you're welcome to contact me if you can, or these are the people in our team who are responsible for each of those instruments. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk now a little bit about the new system in terms of how the transition from the RMA to the new system is going to happen. The first thing to say is that this is all predicated on the bills that have been that came out and were open for submissions. So those bills are still with the Select Committee, and all the considerations, policy discussions, etc., that are happening with the Select Committee are privy to them only. So I can't talk to anything else except for what the bills as they were released say. So it's fair to say there could be some changes through the Select Committee, and we'll have to wait for their report back on that. So so I can't answer any questions on this sort of stuff really, but it'll give you an idea about how it's intended to work. So what's intended to happen is that after the bills are enacted, 1 month after, the transition period will start, and that transition period will run up until it's probably late 28, early 29, when all of the new system plans under the new system are notified, and the minister has to go through a process to turn that system on. So that will be for a few years yet. So during that period, the bills are amending the RMA so that for consents that are lodged in the transition period, there are certain changes that have been made. So the idea with this is that the government wanted to bring some of the benefits of the new system into the transition period where they weren't too complicated or wouldn't mess up RMA decision making too much. So the first point there is there are certain effects that are going to be ruled out of consideration, such as views from private property. There's some procedural principles that we'll need to apply, such as acting in a timely and cost-effective manner. And then some transitional national rules could also apply. This will be a little bit later in the transition period. Sorry to get a bit technical here, but these are new system standards. So they're developed under the new legislative framework. There'll be new system standards for the new system, but the minister can decide, okay, I want these ones to apply in the transition period as well. So for consent people, in your section 104 considerations for consents, the bills add transitional national rules as one of the things that you could have consideration there. So they'll kind of act a bit like a national environmental standard does in the system. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for planning, all the existing plans, RMA plans, all the existing national direction, including the ones that we have talked about today, they continue to apply in this transition period. We've talked about the plan stop, and there's a review that councils need to go through, so that's been suspended. And then when the bills are enacted, and then 1 month after that, when the transition period starts, MFE will be putting out some guidance and communications about that to help you all with navigating the system. And we're working with some of the local government bodies, such as Local Government New Zealand and Tai Tuarau, for to help councils through that period as well. And so I think, as Sally said earlier, so all of these phase 2 national direction changes that have been recently come into force. So the intent is to build on those for the new system, for all the national instruments that will be developed under the new system. But obviously they will have to be designed under the new legislative framework and meet all those legislative requirements. So the intent will be coming through, but obviously the wording and the style and everything will change to meet the new legislative framework. And I think that's it. Happy to take questions.
Any questions? Anyone in the room got any questions?
We do have one for Sally. Why produce a guidance? Why can't people simply rely on the decisions documents for guidance as to the intention of the policy? What weight does guidance have in the law? Hamish has a concern that sometimes MFE guidance looks more like it wishes was in the policy, but it's not.
Yes. Probably not the first person to have pondered this very question, Hamish, but yeah, there you are. Yeah, so you rightly point out guidance doesn't have any weight in law, and I don't think you will find that this guidance that I'm talking about will look like some sort of additional wishes of what the policy says. It is very much focused on explaining the rationale for the policies. In fact, I think the people that were involved in writing it possibly found it a somewhat unsatisfying process, because there's lots of things that practitioners, I think, would probably quite like to say, but then the boring old lawyers come along and everybody else and says, you can't say that, you can't say that, the policy doesn't say this, and a whole lot of interesting stuff gets taken out, and it gets pared back to, what is the rationale and what are we intending by these policies? And you're quite right, it's in a whole lot of other documents, and so we could just rely on that. I guess, though, to be fair, because I was a bit involved with it, I know that we were taking text from cabinet papers, from briefing notes, from decisions reports, from there's a section in there talking about like the NAP, a couple of sentences, I should say, talking about the NAP. So we were taking it from a number of different places. And for us, that's manageable. We're used to doing government policy. We know where to find all of these things. It is all actually available publicly anyway. But is that the case for every consenting planner that's looking at the NPS, that's looking at implementing the NPSNH? So probably not. So I think for the very experienced practitioners who also have a good connection to how government policy works, it won't say anything you haven't read before. I don't think that is our target audience. I think everything that we say is something that a good practitioner, is a conclusion that a good practitioner would come to anyway. The idea is to, I guess, hopefully have that happen a little bit faster for those practitioners who are kind of potentially not as experienced in coming up to speed.
Thank you. Any questions from the room? Still none? Sally, again from Hamish, how would you apply the risk matrix to the potential for volcanic eruption in Auckland?
Well, I think I'm just double checking here, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. Because the NPSNH only applies to 7 particular hazards, and volcanic eruptions is not one of them.
Good answer. Rob's asked, outside of the coastal environment, how will the risk matrix apply if there is no directive on a planning horizon in a changing climate?
Well, there is a policy which says in undertaking the risk assessment, I'm just actually going to have some stuff here. So what the NPSNH requires is that when you're doing the risk assessment, you need to be considering the potential impacts of climate change to at least 100 years into the future. And then there's also best available information clauses as well. So if you can't do that for whatever reason, the best available information clauses will kick in. So the climate change scenario and projections that are used in a risk assessment need to reflect the decision-making process that they are informing. E.g., is it for a spatial planning is it for like a regional plan? Is it for a plan overlay, or is it for a consent, and kind of what sort of provisions there? And that's kind of consistent with a risk-based proportional approach. There is no single statutory requirement mandating the use of specific future projections when assessing the risk from natural hazards impacted by climate change. Current expectations are set through national guidance and policy frameworks, including the National Adaptation Plan. The NAP is principles-based rather than prescriptive, leaving judgment to decision makers who use this science for different purposes, and it recommends that consideration is given to a range of plausible future conditions and tailoring the scenario used to suit the longevity and significance of an activity being considered. Can you tell that we've maybe had to go over this a few times? We are aware that this is one of the most contentious issues with natural hazard planning, and the NPSNH policy doesn't entirely fix it. It is a step in the direction. I think we need to be moderate in our expectations about how far, future articulation of this, future policies, etc., might go in this space. There's lots of reasons why there is uncertainty. And I think that is the thing to focus on, and exactly what the words are used to frame that up, I think needs to sort of be consistent with kind of the information that's going into flood risk modelling, which is going into spatial plans and which is going into then consenting, but there could be very good reasons why what you need to do in each of those spaces is different. Exactly what, certainly at the moment, I think the simplest way to say it is we are asking for NPSNH to look at the impacts of climate change 100 years into the future. What scenario you use about what that future looks like is not prescribed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very applicable to Wellington this week with the crazy rain that we have that's literally off the charts. Karen, I have a question. With the planning and everything, you mentioned that there were some specific projects or specific things that were the intention was to fast track. I think one of them was mining and electricity and those kind of things. What led to those being the driver, and were any other aspects considered, things like coastal protection or flood protection or port infrastructure or anything like that in trying to fast track some of those as well? Or was it, how were those specific projects came about?
So basically they were the government's priorities. So our government's a coalition government, so it was in the coalition policies that they decided that they wanted to give a leg up to infrastructure, aquaculture, renewable electricity generation, and transmission and networks, and seabed mining, in the coastal environment, in the coastal marine area. Yeah. So.
And what does infrastructure encompass?
I might have to hand over to Chitty for that.
Sure. So infrastructure is defined under the RMA, and the National Policy Statement on Infrastructure that has recently taken effect uses that definition, but also has an additional definition for what's called additional infrastructure. So it expands the scope to a bunch of other things that are not part of that RMA definition. So there's health facilities and schools and defence facilities and things like that. So some more of on the social side. So yeah, that's where the scope of those definitions come from. Yeah.
Awesome. Unless there are any more questions, nothing from the room. Come on, April. Sure, you got a question. There you go. Can you just state your name and then?
Well, so I'm just wondering, so with all of this journey, then you have updated, the document, and because the weather is getting more unpredictable, and what do you reckon then the time, or how long do you need to review this to update? Because I think the document we need to keep updating, right? More often and more often. So I think the previous version was in 2010, and now you are getting a new one. And with all of this work that you have done, so what do you reckon? So maybe.
So the new system kicks in, if it goes through, as we expect by about before the election, the new national direction is due to come into force. Well, they're predicting that it'll come in. We don't know, because it's all part of the select committee process and the decisions on the new system. And so it's predicated on that, and it depends on that. But the new national direction is likely to come into force as soon as the end of this year and the middle of next year. So there will be changes quite soon. And I think that, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because it will need to reflect what is the actual wording in the new legislation. But I don't know if my colleagues from MFE, David or Sally, want to say more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I'll just say that when that new national direction comes into effect is currently prescribed by the bill. So don't quote me on this, but I think the first set is supposed to be within 9 months of enactment. and then there's a second set after that. So yeah, the bills have some timeframes for how the government saw the new system rolling out. But just to be clear, that doesn't mean that once that new national direction is promulgated, so it's called a national policy direction, is the first one that will come. That doesn't mean it has effect then, yeah? The new system won't get turned on until all the new system plans are done. So there's going to be the new national instruments, there'll be standards for spatial planning, then there'll be the first regional spatial plans, and again, these timeframes are specified, and then there'll be the new natural environment plans, land use plans that will be developed. And once those are notified, that's when the new system turns on. So the transition period is still for a number of years yet.
As a planner. And it's a lot to learn, you know, a lot of new stuff to learn too. Yeah.
Can you repeat that, Sally? We couldn't hear that.
She was just saying it was a lot to learn.
It's a long process.
And a long process.
Yeah.
Right. If there are no more questions, I just want to thank the presenters, Karen, Sally, and Chitty, for your time and your effort in putting this presentation. Obviously, the contact details are on the presentation, and we'll try and get it out. We'll pop an email to everyone. Just also want to thank Stantec for supplying the venue and the catering, along with the New Zealand Coastal Society. And yeah, thank you to Engineering New Zealand for helping to set it up. Yeah, if there's nothing else, enjoy the rest of your evening. There's still lots of pizza and beverages and stuff to have. Sorry for those who are online, but I hope you have a good evening. And yeah, if you need to take takeout, go ahead. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.